For you, does horror have to be scary?
I think I get asked this a bit like, what is horror? And there's lots of different answers that you can give. But I would say, first of all, so in academia, so like books that are published by like scholars on horror, they always feel like they have to have a section at the beginning where they define what a horror film is, and they talk about what other people say a horror film is. And the actual kind of academic world writing about horror cinema has been going properly about 30 years now, and still no one has come up with like the ultimate definition. So the jury's still out on what horror is. So I go with like my own personal brand of horror, which is I want to be entertained, I want to jump, like I want to feel like the creep in tension. So like with Mirror Mirror, when she's going and putting her hand in the garbage disposal and nothing happens, and then she goes back, that kind of, oh, something's coming. Or like in Mirror Mirror, when one of the two interchangeable men, Jeff, has been getting it on with Megan on her bed, and he decides not to, and he backs towards the mirror, and you're thinking, don't back into the mirror because there's a demon in the mirror. So I like things with a lot of plot, a lot of entertainment, rising tension, suspense. But I'm also quite happy for them to have a kind of bit of levity in places, to have like a light-hearted quality at times. Like I want to finish the film and feel like satisfied, and that I've had like the highs and lows of a roller coaster. That's how I kind of see it. Whereas, quite a lot of horror films, like certain types, really enjoy just like slow dread and trauma and making you feel dreadful and leaving you afterwards feeling really wrung out and destroyed. And they're not really necessarily the kind of films that I enjoy watching. I want the ones where I'm like, is it going to get him? Is it going to get him? Is it in the cupboard? Don't go in there. Don't go in the cellar. And then they do. I like stuff like that. So.
Okay. No, and I think that's totally valid. All genres have their ways of
Yeah.
conveying themselves.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. Horror is a very broad church. There are so many different subgenres. And like it doesn't even have to be what makes you scared is so subjective. And I don't think I'm particularly hard with horror. Like I have watched a lot of it, but I don't think I'm particularly tough. But I'll watch horror films with my friends who don't watch horror films at all, and they're jumping out of their skulls on stuff that I was just thinking is funny. And then equally, there's some stuff I can't watch because it's just too traumatic, and other people lap it up.
yeah.
So it's just such a subjective thing. And like what's on screen, it can just affect you in different ways. Like gore doesn't necessarily make me scared. Like, like zombie films are generally not frightening, but they're horror and they're really violent and action packed. 28 Days Later has some genuine kind of jumps in it, but horror just can be so many different things, can't it?
No, absolutely. And with something like 28 Days Later, it starts and the zombies or the horror really for only about the first half to two
Yeah.
thirds. And then the real horror turns out to be, humanity on the
Yeah.
tail end of the thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's your proper Stephen King horror, that the monsters aren't the things that you really need to be scared of. The things you really need to be scared of are other human beings. Like that's essentially Stephen King's central thesis, I think.
No, that's very fair. Um,
Hey there, Film Buds. Welcome back to the Film Buds podcast. I'm your host, Paul.
And I'm Lauren.
And the clip that opened up the show is from our special guest that we have this week, Dr. Allison Pierce. She's not currently with Lauren and I because of the fact that she's over in the UK and Lauren has to go into an office to work. It wasn't going to work out that we were going to be able to have her on at the same time as us. But if you're unfamiliar, Dr. Pierce has been on before. She was with us for an episode that we did back with Henry when her book first came out, Women Make Horror. And we discussed Mary Lambert's Pet Sematary, which that was me and Henry, but you watched that movie with me.
Yes, I did.
So, dear, since you didn't, I guess, get to voice your opinion on Pet Sematary back then, what did you think of Pet Sematary?
Much better than the remake. It's just really a really good, clean narrative. I think that it's got a lot of like I think that the creepy elements are like spot on. I enjoy the like the whole journey that the family takes. I think more in this one than like the remake that we also watched together. Like the whole like dynamic with how their child ends up, you know, getting hit by the truck, and all of this like descent into madness that the father goes down, and like he kind of, once you've opened the Pandora's box, you can't put everything back in kind of motif of the movie. It works so well in this, and like the creepy neighbor is effectively creepy. And I love that they actually like burned down that house. It's a really good movie, and you know me, I always love a lot of like practical effects, especially when they're done really successfully. And I think that movie is it's really smart in how it executes a lot of the effects to make them just nice and gross and weird in the right kinds of ways, and really spectacular to watch. But it's also like not kind of like other horror where it's like really, I guess, in your face all of the time. Like it has a good build of like normality to it until things start to go haywire. And I really enjoyed that movie. I think that the problem with a lot of like remakes of old things is they're like, we have to make it bigger, better, faster, gorier, and it just kind of loses a lot of that humanity in the process, where it's like, who cares about the people? People aren't here for people, they're here for blood.
Well, and I feel like the original, especially because Mary Lambert, you know, wrote it with King so involved, or directed it, you know, with King so involved. You know, she took it very head on. And I think that people, for some reason, think that they need to try and do something to make King more cinematic or something like that, instead of just taking the narrative such as it is. And on top of that, I also think that the new one really whiffed it on the ending as well. The little changes that they made to the ending, I don't think made it as impactful of an ending as the original had.
No, yeah, and that kid actor is so stinking cute. He does such a good job in it. He's like 2 or 3 or something, and he's like better at acting than a lot of people nowadays. Am I right? But no, I think that like the casting is phenomenal. I think that everything really like just sits so well into like what they were going for. And I do agree that like, because, you know, usually you can it's really a 50-50 flip of the coin of like whether or not having the original author there is like a good idea or not. Like you can really whiff something entirely if you have somebody who's got too much at stake.
Yeah.
In the conversation. But I think that King does a really good job of like, you know, transposing a whole novel into a movie, and like translating a lot of those slower moments that are in his books very well onto film. And I think that that's also to your point of how people can think that they have to like elevate King on film, when in reality they're missing all of those simpler moments. You know, Carrie isn't just Carrie with the powers and the pig's blood and all of that. It's all of the like awkward teenage moments as well.
Yeah.
And I think that if you like really skip over the building blocks to a good story, especially one of King's stories, the whole thing just falls flat in the end, because you don't really care about anything that's happening, and you're just there. If you're just there for atmosphere and you're just there for like you know, to be surprised by something, then like you're not really there for the right reasons. Because I think that horror at the end of the day also has to have some kind of like grounding in a personal storyline and real people doing extraordinary, abnormal things, because then that's what makes your skin crawl. If I'm just watching a whole bunch of people that I can't identify do things in a world that's also like extreme, then I'm just like, I'm not even enjoying this roller coaster. I'm just on a roller coaster to just be on it.
No, yeah. But moving on from Pet Sematary.
Yes, sorry.
No, you're totally fine. For those who don't know a little bit of Dr. Allison Pierce's background, on top of her having her own book, she is also a professor of film, and particularly horror film. And I reached out to her, and I think I mentioned it in the recording that you'll hear. I reached out to her to have her on the show again. It's been about a year since we had her on. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to, you know, bring something unique to y'all. Whenever I put together something, you know, like Women's History Month, you know, with women in film, I always try to go and find things that are a little bit newer and a little bit more unique and aren't necessarily the most obvious of options, because, you know, there are quick and easy answers to these sorts of questions. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't give you the full depth of the history of what is available, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I did intentionally, like with the anime episode, reach out and specifically ask her not just to be on the show, but if she had any suggestions on what she thought we should do this week. And so she brought to us two films from the 90s, Mirror Mirror and Pale Blood. They're both super interesting movies that have recently had restorations and releases on disc. And it's kind of lucky that we have them, because I saw some stats recently, and I can't remember what exactly they were. But they came from a film preservation group that Martin Scorsese is a part of, and there's a pretty shocking amount of film that is gone forever. I don't want to be incorrect in my percentages, but if I'm not mistaken, it's something to the effect of like 70% or more of films before like 1930 are just gone forever.
That
Totally
makes sense.
lost art. And so this is what we talk about, right? When we talk about like film history, what is it? What does it encompass? Why physical media matters, why holding on to these things matter, because at a certain level, you know, if some schmo out in Nebraska, no offense to Nebraska or anything, has a movie on Laserdisc, and for whatever reason an original negative of film is lost, then potentially that schmo's copy of that movie on Laserdisc is, you know, potentially the last thing that's in existence in 40 years of that movie. And for a long time, that's been the argument, if you're ever curious about what the argument is about why they don't release the Star Wars trilogy, the original one, without George Lucas's tweaks. The claim is that the original negatives are gone, and that they don't have any of the old film stock anymore, and that the only stuff that they have now is like essentially his special editions from the 90s onward.
That seems like he did that on purpose. I'm just gonna throw that out there. But I do think that we have the technology to undo his tweaks and go back to basics.
So I found the stats for you. Half of all American films made before 1950 are lost forever, and 90% of films made before 1929 are lost forever.
I mean, that doesn't surprise me at all, because that's also like before we had the Academy Awards and people were really, you know, acknowledging this is a viable medium. You know, it was just kind of, it was a thing that people do, like whatever.
Well, and that film stock was much more fragile. A lot of times, you know, after a certain period of time, especially if a movie wasn't financially successful in any sort of way, that stuff would just get burned or recycled.
Which is crazy because of the fact that, like, I'm sure that it was painstaking to make movies back then. The whole process was really quite remarkable, and they were just like, garbage.
And so what ended up happening is it came to be relied on, like, film projectionists who, like, didn't get rid of that film to end up being some of the places. So, you know, you would go into Grandpap's basement and he'd have some old film reels, you know, like, let's say 5 reels. Only 3 of them are any good. So then we're taking those 3 reels that we found here, this 1 reel that we found in France, and this other reel that we found in Wisconsin, and we're reconstructing the film. And it's a very in-depth process, but this brings us back around to Pale Blood and Mirror Mirror. So
Perfect.
they're straight-to-video films, or at least Mirror Mirror was. And so it's pretty lucky that we still have them, and have them in a form that we were able to go and restore them and bring them back to, you know, former glory, and make them look probably even better than they did when they first aired on TV. They're very interesting films. They're both from 1990. They're both very much of the time, as we'll talk about as we get into it. But they also both tackle very different things. And we'll sort of also discuss some of those themes, but, you know, one of them is a supernatural, you know, demonic witchcraft kind of teen story in a high school. And then the other one in, like, middle America. You know, it's like Illinois or something where the movie takes place, or Michigan or something. Iowa. It's
Iowa, I think, yeah.
And then the other one takes place in Los Angeles, you know. And
it's
so,
very Los Angeles.
with a lot of shots of LA, you know, on the street back in that time, where if you go to LA to those exact same locations now, it doesn't look a lick like that anymore. So without further ado, we're not actually going to do any clips with any of the movies this week. What we're going to do is I'm going to have y'all listen to some of my discussion with Allison, and then when that's over, we'll come back around and Lauren and I will talk about them. So here is myself and Dr. Pierce talking about 1990s Mirror Mirror. So take a listen.
The 2 films that you suggested are both from 1990,
Yes.
and they are Mirror Mirror and Pale Blood.
Yes.
How would you like to begin? Would you like to maybe tell us a little bit about sort of where you saw these films, your experience with them?
Yeah.
Go into them sort of one by one.
Yeah, that'd be great. So I'm really interested in trying to think about what a history of horror films made by women looks like, and that's become like something that's like increasingly interested, I think, just in like culture in general. We're getting so many more lists these days of, you know, like 10 horror films you didn't know were directed by women, blah blah blah. And but what I find is it's the same names over and over again that are referenced in these kinds of lists, and these names are referenced quite rightly because they've made wonderful films. So films like Near Dark from 1987, directed by Catherine Bigelow, you know, Mary Lambert's Pet Sematary, which we've chatted about and I love deeply, but we get the same old people included again and again and again. And so I'm always interested in the bits of history that aren't being written about as much. So the minute I find like a canon that's emerging of like the key women who have directed horror films, I instantly think, well, there must be others out there that just don't make it into the canon. So I always like digging around like the edges of like the accepted discourse on what constitutes history. So like, for example, another film that I really like is Blood Diner from 1987, which is directed by Jackie Kong and is brilliant. But then alongside that, I eventually discovered Pale Blood from 1990. And I also discovered Mirror Mirror from 1990. I can't even remember. I found out about Mirror Mirror first. I'm not even entirely sure where I found out about it. It's one of them that's kind of in the ether. It's very much a cult horror film. So if you Google Mirror Mirror 1990, and you have to put the year, otherwise you get lots of other films called Mirror Mirror and TV episodes, and we don't want any of that. So it's a real cult film, is Mirror Mirror. And if you kind of deep dive into the lists on like women made horror, when you get some that are really well researched by people who spent a good amount of time, Mirror Mirror often comes up. And I was drawn to it because it's essentially like a teen supernatural slasher film in a high school, which is very much kind of on point for me. So I think I first watched it about 3 or 4 years ago and just absolutely loved it. Pale Blood is a newer one for me. I'm not sure where exactly Pale Blood came into kind of my consciousness. I think it was just some general like deep dive trawling on the internet. And I discovered it at the same time that I discovered Tale of a Vampire from 1992, which is directed by Shimako Sato. And it's kind of like Pale Blood and Tale of a Vampire to me are like, they're a great double bill of vampire films from the early 90s, really low budget, directed by women, and, you know, notably directed by women with East Asian heritage. So Pale Blood's directed by Vivi Dachin Hu, who's originally from Hong Kong and is Chinese, and Shimako Sato is Japanese and made Tale of Vampire while she was in London at film school. And so I like finding all these kind of links. And then I discovered that I could watch a decent copy of it when I discovered that Pale Blood had been released by Vinegar Syndrome on Blu-ray, and that made me very happy indeed. So that's my kind of random rambly, where did you hear of those films? But that's it's through the digging, I find. I like digging away and finding the edges of history and going in on those.
No, yeah. That honestly was kind of how I found last week's 2 movies. I wanted to try and find women who had directed films from before 1950.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of this going through of just Googling and trolling and searching. And you know, it can definitely be hard, especially when you are looking for like more and more niche sort of topics of what it is specifically that you're looking for. But you can usually always find some real gems out there, you know?
Yeah. And I stand by Pale Blood and Mirror Mirror as like good, enjoyable films. And, you know, people can argue that stuff's not got into like the canon or the main discourse, because you know what? Maybe it's not very good, but I stand by these films as excellent. And I want to bring these to as many people as possible.
No, yeah, honestly, I had a great time with both of them. And so, you know, I'm going to talk with you, and then later on, I'm going to talk with Lauren about it. And so that'll be the sort of whole of the episode.
Yeah.
But we honestly had a blast watching both of these. We watched them both on
good
Sunday, I think.
Yeah.
And so it was a really fun day.
And what order did you watch them in? I'd be really interested to know which way round you watched them.
Alphabetically. So we did Mirror Mirror and then Pale Blood.
Yeah.
And it, you know, it was definitely like a real sort of gear shift a little bit.
Yeah.
But it was very enjoyable, you know, and it didn't make it like too samey of a day either, which was also nice.
Well, that was one of the reasons why, because I've recently watched Pale Blood, and I knew I'd want to talk to you about it. And then I was trying to think, what shall we watch alongside it if I can get away with suggesting a double bill? And I had thought about Tale of the Vampire, this one I've mentioned from 92, but they both are vampire films, and they're both, well, like Pale Blood's filmed late 80s, but they're both, they can, I watched Tale of a Vampire and Pale Blood within a day of each other. And, there's a limit on kind of vampire stuff for me, really. And I just thought Mirror Mirror is such a different film and like just the way it's shot, they're really different shooting styles. They're really different kind of writing and directing styles. So I just thought it might be a bit more interesting.
No, yeah. Well, why don't we sort of jump on into it? So what can you tell us a little bit about Mirror Mirror?
Okay, so Mirror Mirror, this isn't official synopsis. This is just like me reading my cultural references into it. Mirror Mirror, the lead is an actor called Rainbow Harvest who looks uncannily like Winona Ryder during Beetlejuice, which I think is a very strong reference point for this film. And it's essentially like, what if Lydia from Beetlejuice moved to a new house where there was a haunted mirror that gave her powers like Carrie? And that's kind of like what this film is doing. And that's kind of the plot, which sounds kind of reductive because I think it's a pretty smart screenplay, actually. I found it very satisfying. But it's basically when Lona Megan has to move from LA to kind of a new town, and she's a goth and nobody does goth stuff anymore. And she's a real outsider and she can't fit in at high school. But then this mirror that is possessed by a demon offers her the opportunity to have her heart's desire. And obviously it goes terribly wrong. And, an awful lot of people die in an awful lot of gory and inventive ways. And that's kind of what it is. But I say it's not really doing a full service to it because I think it's quite smart. I mean, what would you say about it, plot-wise?
No, definitely I agree with where I think it's drawing its whole inspirations.
Yeah.
My wife, Lauren, before we, jumped into watching it, she was convinced that it was Winona. And so like she had to love the cast list just to make sure.
Yeah.
No, it definitely feels very Beetlejuice, and like the Susan Gordon character, the mother,
Yes.
feels very much like the O'Hara character from Beetlejuice as well.
Yes, totally. She's very camp and over the top to start with, isn't she? And she's got all these different wigs that she's always got
on. And as like a performer, she kind of reminded me also of Jennifer Coolidge a little bit as well. And so you definitely have that dynamic. And then we really got into it, and it was like, no, this is very much like a Carrie sort of story,
Yeah.
But I think that it does, to your point, I think that it does work really well. I mean, so much of horror, so much of film in general is, taking things that you loved from something else and kind of putting them into a blender.
Yeah, totally. And horror is a genre that is very accommodating of that. I would say like horror fans in particular are like, they're always up for a nod and a wink and a reference to other films. Like it literally like references Carrie in the dialogue when they're talking about, it's not like we dump pig's blood on her, So like it's very playful, and horror fans generally really enjoy that. We all like being in on the joke. Like,
no, for sure.
Yeah.
And so like I didn't have a lot of expectation, I guess, for either of these movies.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of just going in relatively blind, like I knew the general plot of each of them. But going in pretty just sort of cold feet, starting out with it. It's a really great romp, and it starts out that first little bit, it's this sort of idyllic little bedroom, and you've got these pictures of these twins and that kind of thing, and then
like jazz music playing.
The door kicks open, and you've got a girl dragging a woman dragging another woman who's like bound,
Yeah,
up onto the
yeah.
bed, and it's just this entire like, oh, everything just elevated.
Yeah, it's like it's a very confident opening, I think, as well. It's screenwriters who are kind of saying, I know what I'm doing.
Hmm.
I know what I'm doing. And I know, particularly in the horror genre, you really want to start with a bang.
Yeah.
And they really do start with a bang, don't they? It is that thing that, like, the minute it starts and you realize this sequence that you're describing is a prologue, and actually the main film takes place in a different time period, that was my kind of indication that this film was slightly more ambitious in its kind of aesthetic and in its narrative and its stylings than a lot of kind of low budget independent horror from that period. You know, you can have so many films from around this period that have like the thinnest, simplest plot and have like literally 2 locations and nothing else and like 3 actors, because it's all been done on such a budget.
Hmm.
But there's just a lot of ambition, I think,
Yeah.
in Mirror Mirror, a lot of ambition. I mean, I know this is a random tangential point that I'm going off on here, but I was thinking like even the swimming pool sequences at the school, like it's really difficult to film water sequences and it's really complicated, and they have multiple scenes around and in the swimming pool with a ton of actors in. And I was even like noticing the costume design and how they've even just spent the money on all the girls having identical swimming costumes and swimming caps. And you just feel like there's that bit more attention to the detail, and I assume the money to actually spend on having many actors who are all in, you know, bespoke costumes. So I find it all very pleasant because I watch a lot of low budget horror. I watch a lot. So it's particularly nice to find one where they've either found the money or the ingenuity
Hmm.
to just give it that bit more than the bare minimum, you know?
No, yeah, and so much of it is done in camera. So much of it is done
Yeah,
practically that they also, are using a lot of old school, very simple tricks to
yeah.
achieve a lot of really great stuff. Because it's also pretty gnarly. Uh, there are definitely a few moments in there that are pretty gross. The steam to death, sort of
Yeah,
sequence.
yeah.
I was like, this is right up there as being as gross and effective as the nurse getting her head boiled in Halloween 2, type
Yes,
thing.
yes.
Um,
Yeah, definitely. There's a real love of physical effects, like practical special effects, isn't there? Like, obviously, this is like not the time of like digital filmmaking, and you can see there's a lot of time and thought gone into doing decent physical effects. It's fun, I think. Or the other example that I'm immediately thinking of is when the mum puts her hand in the sink thing. What is it? We don't really have them in the UK. The thing that like macerates all the food.
yeah, the garbage disposal.
Yes, that's it. We don't really have them here. I was just like, it's that thing that chops everything. We just have like a hole in the UK that the water goes down and that's it. But yeah, and it's when she puts the hand in it and you're like, oh, they're going to chop her hand off. Then she takes the hand out and she's fine. And you're like, oh, they were just playing with us. But no, obviously she goes back for more.
No, yeah, I was. It does a good job of building the tension and releasing it nicely. It's not overly reliant on like a lot of cheap scares and cheap thrills.
Yeah,
It does a good job of also playing with expectation of a scene, from moment to
yeah,
moment, that kind of thing. Um, so no, I really enjoyed this. I thought the performances across the board were really, really good.
yeah,
Um, I thought the choice to never really show too much of the demon was a really good call as well.
yeah, yeah.
Because
Because
that's
when
a
you turn,
go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to say, yeah, because when you do see the demon, kind of the fullest extent you see him, which is right at the end of the film in the kind of final moments, which, is the right place to actually show him. He looks kind of like the top half of like a weird werewolf man. Like he looks like he's come from The Howling. or something. And so, like, the minute you see it like that, minute you see anything, the tension dissipates, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So the play with on and off screen space is really effectively handled, because obviously when he does pop his head out, you're like, oh, he's a lot hairier than I thought a demon would be. So
No, and like, you think demon trapped in a mirror,
yeah,
it's gonna either have some sort of, I think, like more humanoid look, or maybe something a little
yeah,
bit more ghostly. And so it
yeah.
is an interesting twist of
Choice.
expectation for it to be this incredibly hairy, big clawed thing in this very thin mirror,
Yeah, totally, totally. I also really loved the performances as well, and there was the first time I watched it. I was really drawn by the older woman who plays the auctioneer. You know, the woman who discovers the truth about kind of the black magic and the occult. So her character's called Emmeline, but I had to look that up because I never noticed that anyone was calling her during the film. And then when I looked her up, because I thought she had like the standout performance in the whole film, like everyone was good, but the character of Emmeline was, I just felt like on a different kind of plane to the rest of them. And then when I looked her up, I discovered it was an actor called Yvonne De Carlo, and that she's most well known for playing Lily Munster. But I
Oh.
didn't watch the Munsters. I don't know this. But then it transpired she's like a massive Hollywood actor from the 1920s onwards. And she's been in like Cecil B. DeMille productions. And so suddenly the way that like she elevates every scene that she's in just makes complete sense. And I don't know if you noticed, because I only noticed on the rewatch, but whenever they've got Yvonne De Carlo on screen, the auctioneer, they do loads of close-ups. It's like they can tell that, I mean, the script is fine. It's not like she's having to do anything beyond the script, but there's something about the way she can move her face. And I swear, she's framed in close-up loads more times than any of the other characters in the whole film, including Megan, like including Nikki. There's just something about, it's like, oh, we've got Yvonne De Carlo, let's go for it. Let's just really go in and watch her face perform. And I find it really satisfying to watch, particularly a woman who's older, who you don't get as much chance to see in teenage supernatural slashers.
Yeah.
There's something really satisfying about watching this like powerhouse actor just effortlessly do a thing and eat loads of Chinese food on screen quite a lot of the time.
No, yeah. You're right. You can definitely see those little shifts in her thought, in whatever her tone is, whatever her character is thinking. And it can be a very hard thing to, without really twisting and contorting your face up, convey those little subtle shifts in where your head is at.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm really glad that you mentioned the eating of the food. Because this movie has a little bit of an oral fixation. There's this, you get her eating the Chinese food. You have the gum chewing scene.
Yeah. She's horrible. Don't like it. And she puts the gum on the mirror. I'm like, dirty girl. Don't like that at all.
Yeah, she rubs it around, pops it in her own mouth, and then seems, appalled by how it tastes after the fact. And like, my only thought was, what were you expecting?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we got to the gum. I hoped you were going to go to the dinner party scene soon, though, with the flies.
Yeah, that's what I was going to go to next. Yeah, and the sort of like larvae in the chicken wing for a second.
Oh, it's disgusting. I did an essay film all about eating in horror films called 3 Ways to Dine Well. And I've got a clip from the dinner party scene in Mirror Mirror in there because I just find it so disgusting.
No, yeah. And I guess, I'd be curious if this is something that this director, has done in other things, is like all of this excessive eating, on screen.
Yeah. I don't know. I find, so the film is written and directed by Marina Sargenti. And I find her fascinating because she like sitting here in, 2022, doing my research on the internet, you expect to be able, if you do a bit of digging about someone, you expect to be able to find out quite a lot about them these days online without trying too hard. But she essentially, according to the internet anyway, she just popped up from nowhere to make Mirror Mirror her debut feature film. I can't find any trace of what she did before Mirror Mirror. And then after that, she made 2 TV movies. One of them, the year after Mirror Mirror, was a kind of demonic sort of church TV movie adapted from a James Patterson novel. But she made 2 TV movies, and then she directed a couple of episodes for television, including an episode of Xena Warrior Princess. And then she was all kind of wrapped up with that by the late 90s. And then I can't find her anywhere again.
Huh.
And I don't know what so she's a bit of a, so if anyone knows anything about Marina Sargenti, I would love to find out a bit more about her, because I'm fascinated by how filmmakers make films in the context of not only the time that they're making it, but who they are and where they've come from and what's led them to make a feature film. And I can't find anything out about her at all. And I've not seen the episodes of Xena, so I can't tell if there's any oral fixation in there. But I don't know who she is. So on the Blu-ray release, there's an interview with 2 of the producers of Mirror Mirror. But they talk a bit about Marina, but it's very much in the kind of Hollywood ways. Oh, she was marvelous, she was fantastic, but not really a lot of specifics. So I don't know who this woman is. I would love to find out more about her. And if any of your listeners do know how I might get in touch and interview, I would very much like to.
No, yeah, I mean, it's always interesting. I feel like one-hit wonders are something that, sometimes get applied to things like, songs primarily. But if you really look throughout the history of film, you can find all sorts of directors or screenwriters that popped up, did 1, maybe 2 things. They're remembered for one of them, and then they just sort of vanished into the ether.
Yeah, completely. And, like, making a film is incredibly hard and incredibly stressful. And the amount of films that you develop, like the ratio for actually getting one into production and then getting one that's being made into distribution, like the percentages are so low. Like, so for all we know, like this Marina could have, developed another 20, 30 features that just never got over the kind of final hurdle. But to just there being like nothing out there, that's kind of interesting. Like,
no, for sure. And like based on your description of how the producers talked about it, it honestly feels like she was a bit of an enigma to them.
Oh, she was marvelous. But there's something as well, like the directing is good in this film. Like, again, I watch a lot of horror films, and sometimes like the directing can just be really like not like weak, and in terms of like I don't really have any sense that anyone's in command of what's supposed to go on in this scene, but I think like the directing is slick, the editing's great, the cinematography's great, the production design I just love, like the colors and the props, it's all really well done. So for someone to turn up and make what is a pretty accomplished debut feature film and then just disappear.
Yeah. And I think you're right, it is a very ambitious first movie, and first movies, I was talking with Lauren about them, I think. Films, are sometimes such like a raw example of who that filmmaker is. You go back to things like Bottle Rocket, Wes Anderson's first film. It has all of those sort of Wes-isms, but it's also just this very raw, exactly who he was at that time sort of little capsule. And some filmmakers do only better after their feature debut. Some kind of stay at that level but just have better production values, and so it's always really interesting to see the growth pattern after that initial film. And so it is a little bit of a shame to not have any of that with her, because this was a really solid
Yeah.
first outing. It was really, really good. Um,
And it's like the length of it. I saw, when I first put it on, and I think it's an hour 46, and I was like, oh God, because like to me, like no horror film is improved by being over about 87 minutes. Like that's my ideal length for a horror film. And then for it to be like a debut, I was thinking it's really pushing the limits here. Like I'd really definitely like a debut to come in at under 90 minutes because it's going to drag, but it doesn't drag. Like I really don't notice that, it's tipping over to 1 hour 50. It feels like there's plenty going on in it. And like time is taken with the characters to build. There's no cliches here about, like bitch queen versus outsider. Like those stereotypes are broadly drawn, and then like actual characters emerge, like Megan, who's the protagonist, played by Rainbow Harvest. You really feel the development of her friendship with Nikki, right?
Yeah.
And it feels genuine. And I think that's partly because of this longer running time, that they've just given us a bit of chance for the characters to breathe and to actually get to know each other, which is really satisfying.
No, yeah, you get the nice, build up, and then some of that deterioration,
Yeah.
as Megan starts to go further and further into this possession.
Yes.
And also you get, interesting sort of reversals with the boyfriend characters. The popular cool jock one is kind of the nicer, more understanding of the two, and the best friend's boyfriend is the one that's kind of a little bit of an ass at times.
Yeah, totally. The first time I watched it though, like they were just completely interchangeable in my mind. Like
Yeah.
I couldn't tell they were just two like vaguely handsome young men, and I couldn't really tell who was who. And it's only like on the second outing that I've completely established who is Jeff, who is like the bitch queen's boyfriend, who is actually quite nice. And then it's Ron, who's the one who eats all the sandwiches and is really mean to Megan. So.
Yeah. No, I honestly, Lauren and I were in the same place. We were sitting there watching it together, and finally we got to this one scene where, like, you see both of them. I think it was the cafeteria where you see both of them in relatively close proximity, and I was like, they're the same. I was like, I don't know how they're not twins.
Yeah, I'm not very good with faces. I thought it was just me, so I'm really glad you said that as well, because they were completely interchangeable the first time I watched it.
No, absolutely. And even toward the end of the movie, until there was finally just one of them, I was like, God, I could just easily put him in the other costume and just
Yeah, and they could just carry on. They could have just carried on, and we'd have been none the wiser.
Yeah, we don't have Ron in today. Can we get Jeff?
Yeah, Jeff will be fine. No one will notice.
But no, I really enjoyed this one.
Good. I'm pleased.
Yeah, I guess if you had to rate it out of 5, what would you give?
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, but you have to bear in mind that I'm biased in lots of ways, because one, it's like all about female characters and female friendship, and like it's directed and written by women, and like half the crew are women, so that's very much my ballpark. And then you have to remember it's a supernatural slasher, which I also love. And then you have to remember it's like a high school horror, which I also love. So I would have to give it, I reckon, like 4.5 out of 5.
No, I think that's pretty fair. I think that's pretty fair.
It's really bang on for me in some, and to add to it, because obviously it's filmed at the back end of the 80s. That's the period when I was a kid. And so there's a certain nostalgia element for me in seeing what all the teenagers are wearing and what the parents are wearing. Because, I mean, my mum didn't dress like Megan's mum, let's be clear. But there's a certain nostalgia in remembering the adults around me wearing those kinds of clothes. So I also really like that as well.
No, and that's totally fair, you know. Ratings are entirely subjective, and
Yes.
you know, they can be choices of the heart more than
Yes.
um I'll save my rating until Lauren and I are talking, but I think
Okay.
I'll think 4.5 is incredibly fair.
Yeah.
Um
Thank you.
yeah.
So that was Mirror Mirror, which we kind of already gave a little bit of a description on and that kind of thing. So, and you should have a good idea of what the plot is if you just listen to that discussion. Since I already talked about it some and Allison already talked about it some, dear, what did you think of Mirror Mirror?
So I think that like everything you guys said was completely on point. I loved literally her description of it being like, what if Lydia like got Carrie powers and basically kind of went on a weird teen murder spree. And then there was also demonic possession. Like that's exactly what this movie is. I really enjoyed this movie a lot. Yes, I was convinced that she was Winona Ryder. It's really I loved the fact that like they brought so many of their influences like so directly into this movie, because like you were right, it is like you know, Lydia and not Catherine O'Hara.
I think so.
Is that her name? Catherine O'Hara is, you know, as the mom, very eccentric, very artsy, very city folk. But instead of them being from New York this time, they're from Los Angeles. And, you know, instead of them moving to, like, I don't know where they go, like Connecticut, I think. And they moved to, like, Iowa. But other than those things that I was like, it's just Beetlejuice. I thought that the opening was like really interesting, of these like two twins where like one, you know, murders the other to try and not have the spirit in the mirror do spirit things anymore. I love when people are like, I'm gonna delve into to black magic, basically, and I think I know something, and so therefore I'm just gonna keep going until, shocker, it doesn't work the way I expected to, and I was duped the whole time, and maybe I can fix this real quick with like some split decision, which I'm sure honestly she probably got from influence from the demon in the mirror. But no, I think that the teen aspect of this works really well. I'm always like a little hit and miss on teen movies, depending on how, I guess, how much teen they put into it, if that makes sense. I think that this movie had the right amount of like, you know, girl friendship and like true bonds and like, you know, high school, especially of this, you know, early 90s, late 80s time frame that we're in, with a school with a pool in it, which is such a culture shock for me. I've literally never in my life seen an actual swimming pool in a high school before. That's money, right now, holy money. But I think this movie was a crazy ride, honestly, and like really trying to figure out what was going to happen next. And our I love the fact that we started with one character as like our main character, and we follow Megan for a very long time, and then there's this point like in the third act where our perspective character switches and our final girl changes on us to be her friend, who I don't know the name of at the moment.
Nikki.
And it's really like her trying to basically pull Megan back from the brink of this demonic, it's not really like a possession, it's more of like a persuasion, I guess, is like my best way to say it, because like she's fully aware of all of the things that she's doing, but she really enjoys, you know, the attention that she's getting and the confidence that this, you know, entity is giving her, and is completely aware of like all of the people that she wants to murder, and just like totally like gung-ho for it until the moment where she loses control. And I think that it's kind of interesting play almost in like a predator aspect of like grooming somebody to be something until, you know, and then them realizing what's happening and trying to fight back, but at that point it's pretty much too late.
Well, that shift to Nikki definitely mirrors some of that in the Carrie book. You know, the inclusion of the Sue Snell character.
Yes, she is like a Sue.
Yeah, because it's ultimately, you know, this connection between them. And here they're much more friends than Sue and Carrie ever were. Mm-hmm. But it's that thing where they're connected at this certain level and they're there together at the end. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you were talking about it giving her more confidence. Another thing that's interesting about the movie is that as her confidence gains, her costuming and wardrobing gets more fitted. You know, when we first meet her, it's this ultra big leather jacket. It's a bunch of layers, and as we go deeper into it, it has a little bit more sort of a sex appeal to it. You know, it's this little black dress that's like partially backless, you know, and then it's that like shouldered, you know, button down number with a skirt, and so she starts to also slough off some of these more roomy pieces of attire that she's definitely using to kind of hide away in, you know, that she's wearing to be a little bit more comfortable in her. But as she goes along, it gets, you know, like I said, more fitted, and a little bit more what's the word that I wanna use here? More clean, also in its look. You know, it doesn't look quite as cluttered as some of her earlier looks.
No, I'd agree. And honestly, going off of that, I would say that not only do the layers, you know, peel away, you know, she's, but also I think that her gothic, like, attire starts to become more and more aligned with, like, the teens of that time as well. She starts to find this, like, journey of, instead of it being like a very like overtly I'm an individual gothic attire, I wear what I want, she starts to almost mirror in her own way the aesthetic of the school as she gains her own confidence as well, because like her makeup starts to settle out.
Yeah.
And her hair she starts to wear it down more, and, you know, she starts to wear less black. And from the beginning, she was like all black the whole time. And I think that that's a really interesting, like, transition point, because she had this, like, really cool, like, shaved part of her hair that was, like, bleached blonde, and then, like, as she starts to progress to, like, this pretty girl aesthetic, let's say, she starts to, with her hair down, you can't see it as much, and she, you know, she starts to kind of remove a lot of those layers that she was holding on to. I think that it's also, you know, based probably in, like, in her insecurities and, like, this kind of cocoon to butterfly effect, but it's not the kind that she was expecting. You know, she fully accepts it. She's fully like, yes, I am confident. I am here. I can do what I want. I can take what I please, until she realizes that she doesn't have any control over it. And this has been like, if anything, like a false, like, and it's an illusion that the spirit in the mirror has been giving her in order to gain more and more control over her.
No, absolutely. I do want to touch briefly on some spoilers in the ending. So if you don't want to hear anything about the ending, there are always time codes, so you can go ahead and skip to me and Allison's. Before we get into spoilers, how about this? Dear, what would you rate out of 5 Mirror Mirror?
Oh, I think that I will also go with a 4.5. I thought that this movie was super well executed. I think that all of the story and the gore was just like so good in this movie that I really kind of got lost watching it, which is always something that's fun, especially when you do watch so many movies, to allow yourself to just go for a ride and try and figure out what's going to happen next. And for the life of me, I had no idea what was going to happen next, and that's such a rare phenomenon. And yeah, no, I thought that this movie was just like a real gem out of nowhere of the early 90s, you know?
No, absolutely. I think that I'll go 4.5 as well. It does have it's so very in its period. It has all of these very clever little flourishes. It does some really, really clever, proper staging work to stretch everything as far as it can, while still also conveying what it needs to. And I think it works very, very well. And on a certain level, I think it also has a little bit of Raimi in it, with like the weird doppelganger of Nikki, with some of the camera work as well as a little Evil Dead.
Oh, yeah, I loved this, I was gonna say, it was like, it's definitely like a little Evil Dead moment where she's just like cracking up in the corner after she's like murdered the boyfriend. It's great.
Yeah.
It's a good time.
But going again back to the unexpected, and this is where we'll get into our spoilers of it. The ending of this movie is, for me, probably one of the most surprising things, not in a way that I think it, ruins it. I don't think that it's one of those, twist or sudden what the hell endings that, ruins the whole movie. But at the end of the movie, it's revealed that, Megan and Nikki, because Nikki does the thing that she's not supposed to do.
Oh, she asked
She asked the mirror for something.
Yeah. And it's literally was like old Chickadee number one rule was like, don't do that.
Yeah. And so what ends up happening is Nikki and Megan are transported back, and it turns history on its end, and instead of it being the twin sisters from the beginning of the movie, it recreates that whole moment essentially, but now it's Nikki and Megan who are sort of in the past, and Megan is the one that's been killed, and Nikki is the one that is offering up, this sacrifice or what have you to kind of end the magic.
No, yeah, and I really enjoyed the ending because it left you in this air of wait a minute, is it just a loop? Is this the mirror? It's just constantly recreating this, but with different people. It made me think more about what happened to those sisters in the past to get them to this point. Was it like a very similar of that time era storyline? What happened? And I think that me continuing to ponder that moment really landed. And to your point, I think that it could have definitely made or break the movie for a lot of people, I'm sure, but I thought that it was a solid oh, it's still a mystery, there's not a clean happy and we tied a bow on it ending.
And on a certain level, it also gives Nikki the opportunity, if she makes the right choices, to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Instead of what the twin did, where everybody was just oh, she went crazy after her sister disappeared, and the lore that the teenagers were telling through the school.
No, exactly. And so I think that it's a really, it's not, if you've ever seen the movie Deadly Blessing, that movie has like a little twist ending at the very very end that was a studio edition, and it totally kind of undermines like pretty much the entire film that you've been watching. But I don't think that this does that, and I think that it's still really really effective. I think it works very very well.
No, yeah, and honestly, I really enjoyed this movie being about it's about trauma. And I really enjoyed like the different kinds of like traumatic things that happen not only to like our leads, but also like in the story itself. It's the old woman who loses her sister and goes mad and like is a joke of the town, or Megan who has lost her father and is having a hard time dealing with this loss, and ends up adopting basically this pseudo lover of the mirror basically, and like uses this in order to fill a void that she's missing, or the mom that has lost her husband, and like the therapist is like, you gotta go and move and get some dogs and you should make new friends. And it's all of these different people who are struggling with like
Grief.
Yeah, and it's just really interesting, this whole journey, and to the point where like we end up getting, Nikki at the end, who has experienced, losing her boyfriend and now losing her best friend in like such a traumatic way. And like she had gone there to try and help, I think deep down she was definitely kind of forced to go, because like by the threat of death. But I think that also like she did want to help Megan, and like losing her friend was also like this is horrible traumatic experience, and it's kind of how this cycle continues constantly. And then I thought that was a really interesting and an effective way of like breaking down human experience as well.
No, absolutely. I think it's a really fun little movie, and I'm very grateful that she was willing to share it with us. I'm glad that I bought it. I think it's one that I'll definitely rewatch. It's a fun time, and I definitely recommend, if you're looking for something a little bit off the beaten path and you want to expand some of that knowledge and get a little bit deeper into horror, I think that this is definitely, a good fun movie to start with.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Moving on, we now have our other film from 1990, Pale Blood, and here is my conversation with Dr. Pierce, so take a listen.
So what can you tell us about Pale Blood?
Pale Blood, it doesn't have, I think, quite as simple, like straightforward a plot in many ways. I think it takes a bit longer to nail what it's about, but essentially there's a serial killer stalking the streets of LA, and they're being nicknamed as the vampire killer because the victims are being found with puncture marks and drained of blood. And we follow this fact, this kind of murder spree, draws the attention of Michael Fury, which is the best character name ever.
Yeah.
And he is a vampire who's drawn to LA, and he wants to try and stop this vampire serial killer from doing any more bad murders. So Michael Fury turns up at the beginning of the film and arranges to meet Laurie, who is kind of like employed by a research agency and is there kind of doing occult research. It's not quite clear, really, I don't think. But basically, Michael Fury teams up with Laurie, and it's kind of the classic odd couple where because he's a vampire, obviously he's pale and silent, and she's young and romantic and dreamy and really enthusiastic, and he's like, let's just get the job done. And it follows Michael and Laurie's exploits as they attempt to uncover their vampire killer.
Yeah. No, I think that calling some of the role there a little bit unclear is very fair.
Yes.
Um,
When it begins and like he turns up at the shop and there's like, I think there's like news cameras there and stuff. And then that woman's there and it turns out to be Laurie. But I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I'm really confused. But it settles down eventually.
yeah. Um, no, I thought that this was an interesting one. You're right. Michael Fury is a great name. We've got one great character name and one great actor name because we've got Michael Fury as a character played by George Chakiris.
Oh, I don't know. Because I don't recognize him either. He could be like a really well-known actor for all I know. And I just don't know who he is.
He was Bernardo in the old West Side Story.
Right. Okay. That doesn't help me either, but okay.
And then we have the actor Wings Hauser as Van, and like that name is just fantastic. I saw his cast name and I was just like, Wings Hauser.
Yeah, brilliant. Wings Hauser playing Van Vandermeer.
Yeah. Well, and of course, it's a vampire story, so we have to have someone named Van, as a little wink and a nod. But no, I liked this one. I didn't enjoy it, I think, as much as Mirror Mirror, but I did like this movie. It's very atmospheric.
Yes,
it's
absolutely
very moody. The soundtrack is fantastic.
It's so good.
Yeah. I went out and bought one of the Agent Orange tracks
Did
from
you?
the movie. Yeah, because it just got stuck in my head, and I was like, I gotta get it out.
That's so funny that you've immediately gone to kind of mood and tone, because that's just why I like this film. So I feel like with Mirror Mirror, I feel like the whole thing's pretty tight in terms of script and stuff like that. And I don't necessarily feel Pale Blood is tight, but what I'm really drawn to is the feel of this film. Like it feels like on the brink of punk versus post-punk. There's so many like record shops and the nightclub scenes and Agent Orange playing and all the different tribes of fashion. Like, I just love it. Like, it has such like a Lost Boys vibe, in the Lost Boys when they're down on the boardwalk. I feel like, in a way, it's like the tone of the Lost Boys boardwalk relocated to Sunset Boulevard. So like this is just like, this movie just feels really punk in its attitude and like punk in its tone, and it's incredibly stylish. And I think I was just drawn to that more than anything.
No, and I think that that's totally fair, because as I was watching it, it has that it's 90, and so we're also kind of right there in the swell of sort of like the neo-noir boom and like the beginning of like the erotic thrillers and that kind of thing. And so it definitely is pulling on all of those as well, with these very the house that he's staying in, this very 80s home, with the glass, the little square glass bricks.
The glass bricks.
Yeah.
That's how it gave it like the period so precisely. When you have an internal wall that's built of glass bricks, then you're in a certain time period, don't you?
Absolutely.
I just love it.
Because it's never been used since. Not another.
No one like beyond kind of like the 90s thought glass bricks was a good idea. So
and so it's so many of the exteriors are just like drenched in neon lighting, and it has that proper sort of pulpy feel to it, as you're going through it.
I think it's so interesting that you mentioned noir, because I absolutely love noir. I love neo-noir. And it's not something I'd thought about until you mentioned it. But now you've mentioned it, you're totally right. I'm even just thinking about like the montage of like the LA highways that you get every so often in it. And it does have that kind of pulpy noir feel, doesn't it? So that's probably another reason why I'm so into it. And it's a detective story.
Yeah. And it's a really interesting movie also in production because, and I could be dead wrong about this, maybe you have an answer, some of it was filmed in Hong Kong.
Yeah, I don't know that, because it says that online in quite a few places. But I don't know. I mean, it's possible. Like the director is originally from Hong Kong, but her family had immigrated to Hawaii when she was 17, and then she moved to New York and then LA. So it's possible that some of it's in Hong Kong, but I don't know which bits.
No,
I'm really not sure. Like to me, it looks very LA. It looks like it's all filmed around, like as I say, like Santa Monica Boulevard, basically.
no, for sure. And it does have some LA locations listed.
Mm.
But I thought the other interesting thing about it was that it felt like a lot of it had been done in sort of a spaghetti western style of production of we took the camera out and we
Yeah,
recorded without sound, and then we came in later and just did nothing
yeah,
but ADR.
yeah. And there's a one or two scenes where I was like, this feels very ADR. I'm sure there's a lot of ADR going on here. But then there's just some of the scenes where, like you say, you feel that there's some kind of renegade filmmaking going on where they've just like driven past and filmed a load of punks while they didn't even necessarily realize, because it feels like that it obviously it's not, but it almost has like a documentary feel in places, and some of the exterior shooting in particular, it just feels like they're capturing what bits of LA looked at that point in time as they were filming, regardless potentially of permits or permissions.
Well, especially in LA, it can be such a cumbersome process, to
Yeah,
get exterior shooting permits and get, everything locked down. And
yeah,
and so if they were, I'm sure that this wasn't like a low budget, but I'm sure that it was a tight budget for what they
yes,
were trying to do. And so sometimes, maybe it's just, especially back then, a little bit more of a roll of the dice on
yeah.
we'll just
And
do a
it's
few
like,
takes real quick.
yeah, let's just go for it, and let's just film at this like sidewalk and see who we can get in shot, and then we'll put that into the film, in case it's not quite enough story, that we can have some really cool shots. And that's how it ends up being a film for me, as much about like mood and tone and atmosphere, because you do get such a sense of time and setting with this one.
No, absolutely. And a lot of very interesting little tiny visual flourishes,
Yeah,
there's the scene between Michael Fury and I think it's Jenny. No, maybe it's Cherry. The
one
woman
of them.
at the
They've
at the
got really
club.
similar names as
Yeah.
well. Like they should have called one like Veronica or something, but it's actually hard to differentiate their names, isn't it?
Yeah, Lori, Jenny, Cherry.
Yeah.
Real mess of names. And like as they're going into her apartment, it has this sort of smeared high motion blur effect, through.
Yes.
Uh,
And that's so of its time as well, isn't it? There's that particular visual effect that was used throughout the 1980s that kind of dates it to a particular time period.
no, for sure. But it works so well in the film because also none of these things are being done, as kind of a play on any of it. Like it's all being done very earnestly.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't say that, it's fun to watch it, but I also wouldn't say that it ever feels like it's making fun in any sort of
No.
way of
Yeah.
those choices and of that style.
Yeah, completely. I feel like the filmmakers are committed to making the best possible vampire film that they can here. There's no kind of arrogance, I would say, or kind of like lazy irony or anything. They're really going for it, which I'm very into.
No, yeah. I loved his portable coffin.
Yeah, that was a bit wild, wasn't it? I was like, wow, they'll have definitely had to build that for the film, won't they? Like
Yeah.
very specific, this kind of pop up, like they couldn't have a pop up tent and it's just a pop up coffin. Kind of.
And yeah, like I imagine that they did probably, now that you mention it, go and like get some actual tent poles and probably use that as their basis for some of the framing of that thing. But you're right, it probably had to be a custom piece.
Yeah, which is crazy. Like, say, when you're doing stuff on such a low budget as an independent filmmaker, that, you know, like choices to essentially custom build a coffin. It's just brilliant. I love it. I love it.
Um, but no, I think this movie works pretty well.
Yeah.
It definitely, I think, builds as it goes and gets a
Yeah.
little bit more focused as we get to
Yeah.
our final reveal. Um,
Yes.
and I thought that the cast did a really good job. I think that Wings Hauser, for me, honestly, did sort of steal Van, just about steal every scene that he was in.
Yeah, I mean, like he's like relishing being the evil filmmaker, isn't
Yeah,
he? You know, like he is having a great time, like really performing like the baddie to the fullest extent. And just really creating a portrayal of filmmakers as complete like dickheads,
yeah,
like arrogant, egotistical dickheads who are consumed by that art. Like, you know, really early on that Van is a bad person because one of the first speeches he has is like making a case for video art as like a really fine form of expression. You're like, oh, okay, right. He's going to turn out to be a dickhead. And like, he's just really like, when he sat at his bank of monitors, which is really creepy. And then he's making the girls do like their weird performance art piece with an egg, and it's like you're like, oh, he's just horrible, and then he turns out to be a really horrible person, doesn't it? So
yeah. Um, no, I think I think also that sort of element really plays in well with the idea of vampires, you know, this perpetual
yeah,
stalker, this kind of watcher.
yeah, and
Um,
taker, like a
yeah,
feeder on other people.
no, and so I think that he plays totally right into that exact sort of um, you know, sort of cultural makeup of how we perceive vampires, you know, on a certain level.
Yeah, it's 100%. It's a really good analogy. Like in my screening notes for this, I literally wrote in capitals, filmmakers are takers in this horror film. And it made me think of like Peeping Tom and films where like the actual filmmaking apparatus is part of the horror, which, you know, I don't know if this film's necessarily referencing Peeping Tom. I mean, the director did go to UCLA film school, so, you know, she may well have watched it. But there is just that sense of whenever filmmakers are in horror films, they're always like dreadful people. They're always doing something awful.
No, that's true. There aren't a lot of examples where, now that you mention it, if I'm really thinking about it, there really aren't a lot of examples of movies about movies or filmmakers or what have you where they are, you know, genuine altruistic, you know, they're the good guys of the story kind of folks. You know, because like you think about Tropic Thunder, the only person who's meant to really be like a nice guy in that is one of the lesser actors of the whole thing.
Mm,
You look at Truman Show, and
yeah,
the director of that is, of course, our ultimate villain of the piece.
yeah.
Um,
Directors seem to be fond of casting their art as something draining that takes and is like egotistical. I was
yeah,
thinking even about like the low budget, I think slasher from '91 called Popcorn, which is amazing. I mean, I should just come on another time and talk to you about Popcorn because it's a load of filmmaking students who put on an all-night horror film screening in a local theatre that's about to be taken down, and even like just the act of like watching films is enough for the horror to erupt like literally through the screen. And like
huh.
whenever anyone is making films or screening films, like something dreadful will happen.
Interesting. No, I'll definitely we can definitely do Popcorn the next time that you come on.
Yeah, Popcorn's great, and it recently got, I think, a restoration, but if not, like a straight Blu-ray release, so it is available now, and it's fun. Like you'll have judged now. Like I've recommended 3 films in total to Film Buds now to watch, and I would say all of them. So Pet Cemetery, Pale Blood, Mirror Mirror, they all have a fun element to them. And I like my horror films to be fun, and popcorn is a lot of fun.
So if you had to give Pale Blood a score out of 5, what would you give it?
I would go 3 for this one. And that's, I would say for my personal enjoyment, I would hit it higher. But I don't think the script is quite as tight as Mirror Mirror if we're looking at comparisons. But it gets like a solid 3 for me, almost purely on the visuals and the setting and the punk as anything kind of tone, and the soundtrack. I mean, it's filled with all of my favorite things about like 80s and 90s horror films. So you have all the fashion, like kind of the alternative independent fashion. You have filming in nightclubs, which is also a thing that's in Blood Diner, the Jackie Kong film that I love. And you have a band playing on stage, which I love and is very kind of Buffy, which also makes me very happy. And there's just so much fashion and kind of insouciance in it. It gives me everything I need from a kind of 80s, 90s film, I think. But I think in terms of a complete package, it's probably more of a 3.
No, I think that's pretty fair. I don't know exactly what Lauren will say, but I feel like she'll probably come in pretty close to a 3 as well.
Yeah.
But
what about you? Oh, you're going to say at the end, aren't you? I'm not going to hear right now what you think.
I'll give you this one since I didn't on Mirror Mirror. I'll give you on this one. I think that I'll go a 3 as well. I think that that's all really fair criticisms of it. I do think that where it excels incredibly well.
Yes.
But I do think that there are those few little elements that just hold it back from being, to you said, as tight and as focused, and have as much momentum as it could have.
Yeah, completely.
No, I think that that's all great. Is there anything that you would like to say to the Film Buds, where they can find you? Any sort of final thoughts that you would like to share with the listeners?
Oh, yeah, of course. So I recommend everybody goes out and watches Pale Blood, and watches Mirror Mirror. And if you enjoy them, I would also recommend Blood Diner from 1987. And if you're really into, and that's by Jackie Kong, and if you're really into vampires, I recommend Tale of a Vampire from 1992 by Shimako Sato. There's a whole world of 80s and 90s horror films directed by women that no one is talking about, and there's a real like embarrassment of riches out there if you go digging for them. So I recommend that all the listeners go in and enjoy these films. If you want more from me, you can find me on Instagram at Instagram/Alison Pierce. I've also got the website, which is alisonpierce.com. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes. I've got a really weird spelt surname, so I'd have to spell it out on there. And last thing, I've got, 2 last things. My last book is Women Make Horror, Filmmaking, Feminism and Genre, which if you like this stuff on women filmmakers, you might want to get hold of. And I've also got a horror film newsletter called The Losers Club, which is named after a Stephen King novel. And I send that out roughly every 2 weeks, and it's kind of what I've been watching, what I've been reading, just my thoughts and whatever random horror things I've been up to. So if you are interested in that, it's free and you can sign up on my website.
No, yeah, that's great. And Women Make Horror is a phenomenal book. So
thank you.
Yeah, of course. Definitely go and pick that one up. Do you have any other upcoming projects that you're working on?
Yes, I do. I'm currently on research leave. So my job is Associate Professor of Film at the University of Leeds in the UK. And I won a big grant, a fellowship to buy me out of teaching for the next year so I can write my next book. And I'm now writing my next book, which is provisionally titled Her Chainsaw Heart, the women filmmakers, critics and theorists who redesign the horror genre. And I'm going in much deeper. So Women Make Horror is like the beginning, and this is like the next level book. And I'm writing all of this one on my own about all the different ways to think about women filmmakers and horror films. So I'm on with that at the moment. I only started in February, which is when my research list started, but hopefully I'll write that over the next year, and then it'll be out at some point after that.
That sounds awesome. I love
Thank
the
you.
title. I love the concept. So titles are such difficult things to get right.
Oh,
but
so
that
hard.
I think that's really fantastic. I like it a lot.
Thank you.
I will definitely link everything for Allison down below.
Thank you.
So definitely go and check out all of her stuff. Get the book. It's really good stuff.
So that was our discussion on Pale Blood. And I'm going to, once again, since they've heard from me a little bit already, turn it over to you. So what did you think of Pale Blood?
I felt like this movie had no idea where it wanted to go until it knew where it wanted to go. It was a great ride, but I definitely felt for like a good half I was like, what is the story here? Like, who are these characters? Why are we following them around? It was a lot of like atmosphere and mood and setting, and not a lot of dialogue. And when there was dialogue, it was like constantly focused on this idea that there was a vampire murdering people, but like, how did you never, go to look this dude up before your whole entire correspondence with him, and then you brought him to town on you're just talking to a stranger? Like, how did you know? I guess this is before all of our technical advances and like trolls on the internet kind of deal. I was like, why did you trust him so much? There's a lot of like air in this movie, I feel like, which is a good and a bad thing. I think that the things that are really strong about this movie are the weird like mood setting things, the very edgy kind of world that we're living in that's just like adjacent to reality of sorts. It's because this is a world where vampires are real, and I think that those are the things. The lighting of this movie is really interesting. I think that a lot of the locations are really cool. I loved this entire house or whatever that he is staying in that is ginormous, that has no furniture. And so it's almost like a museum of sorts of like, when you go into like an empty abstract building and you're like, what was this room even supposed to be? Well, how was I supposed to put furniture in here? What does this place look like? It looks like the house that Catherine O'Hara turns the Beetlejuice house into, but completely empty and white. You know what I mean? Like very like Art Deco, but also like completely void. And I think that that's, I guess, kind of where this movie hits for me, is like the I loved the club scene where they're like all of these weird costume. Well, it's of the times, but like now I can say that they're like very, above and beyond, I guess, very not my mom dressing of that time. It's very like the young.
Well, I think it's supposed to be like a leather club.
Oh, okay. It's like I was gonna say it's very the youth culture, the rebel youth culture, kind of colliding with I guess like an older rebel culture of sorts, with this like our lead guy, Michael Fury, that is his name. I kept being like Bernardo in my brain, and his like weird relationship with whomever the girl's name is. It doesn't matter right now. The Russian one, maybe she's
Sherry, maybe
that sounds like a song. And like this weird relationship that they had of like catching eyes in a club, and it really made me feel like all of those old kind of old vampire movies where they could, like, you know, entice somebody to come and they would feed off of them and they would never remember it in the end, you know. This way of being able to persuade people with just a look or just a word, you know. I thought that it had that really interesting kind of, I don't know.
Well, because of her costuming, she's also she stands out entirely separately from everyone. So she's this very eye-catching thing. And because he's this kind of, in his costuming, this kind of Johnny Cash Man in Black kind of thing, and he's surrounded by this sort of like leather club punk aesthetic kind of thing, then she comes in this bright, you know, dress.
I think she's wearing like bright pink.
And so she almost on a certain way comes across as like more pure, you know. She's this different, flowery, bright presence, you know, in this dark and this dinge.
You know, and I think that also lends with you saying pure as, like, again, with the vampire, you know, isms that we've come to know and love. Is like they always want to go for somebody who's pure of heart, you know, and, you know, maybe not as, I don't know, trashy, I guess. Because, like, you're going to be literally drinking this person's blood. This is right in the middle of the AIDS epidemic. Like, I'm sure that if I were a vampire, I'd be like, maybe her, and not any of these dirty folk. But then there's, like, I have a lot of questions about some of the casting in this movie. Like, I love Bernardo. I think that he's great as Michael Fury. I want to call him Nick Fury so bad. But Michael Fury, I think that he does a great job, but I also think that it kind of could have been anybody. And I'm not sure if I 100% buy. I think that their chemistry, him and Cherry or Mary or Carrie, whomever, I think that their chemistry is way better than his chemistry with Laurie. I think that honestly, like, if we you know, once you get to the end, you figure out more things about her character. But, like, from the beginning, I was like, I don't understand how you got to become a detective at all, because you haven't done any detective work in this entire thing. If anything, you've done a lot of, like, weird seances and stuff, but I've never once seen you actually in a police department at all. You could have been anybody. Everybody could just be anybody in this movie. It's so strange. And I feel like a lot of also, people have run into people a lot in this movie, just like, oh, we just happened to be at the same club as such and such in the other one? How coincidental. And I was like, how? This is LA. So it really kind of like it's almost like put it into like a time capsule, like in a bubble. It's in its own little pocket universe where there's only 5 people basically, and then there's these like really cool shots. But I've rambled so much. This movie has like a lot of like interesting layers, I guess, is my takeaway, and I like the way that it uses the vampire isms, but in this like different way, and they're not as obvious as other parts of the movie that are very obvious, where I was like, so he's our Van Helsing, you say? You don't say. Like, wow, could have given me a bigger doozy on that one, but you were like, here it is, it's right here, easy as pie, you know.
No, absolutely. I think one other thing, you know, tapping into the vampire lore and what they do interestingly with this story is there is also this kind of faint idea of consent, because Michael Fury doesn't just run around feeding indiscriminately. You know, he goes, he talks to her, it becomes a consensual act between them, and then he feeds on her. Whereas our villainous guy, who isn't even a vampire, is out here running around forcibly doing this, taking this, you know, and I think
like
that
he's owed something in this whole thing.
And so I think that it also becomes this little vague idea on consent well.
maybe that can be even mirrored with the fact that, like,
Mirrored?
nice. With the fact that, like, Michael Fury is so much older than, like, everybody else in the film, and Van is, like, I'd say maybe, like, in his 40s at the time, and, like, I'd say that Michael was probably in his 60s to, like, I'd say 60s is probably accurate. And so it's kind of this weird, like, older man, gentleman, you know, kinder, gentler, mysterious man, whereas, like, there's this young guy who basically struts around town, takes what he wants, and, like, doesn't really care who he affects in the process. But also feels like he deserves something out of the whole thing, you know what I mean? Where he's like the scummy film guy who's like, I can basically have these women do whatever I want them to and wrap it up in the bow of art, and that also allows me to be a scumbag and to treat people however I want. Whereas, like, Michael, who is a vampire, has all of these you know, stereotypes against him because of what he is, and is, like, constantly, you know, going above and beyond to be different than what you perceive him to be. And I think that that's also, like, really an interesting dynamic with our literal only males in the movie. Also, I think that it's really interesting that it is so much in, like, this male perspective for it to be, you know, directed by a woman, because, like, Michael Fury is our main character, and then when it's not him, it's pretty much like either maybe Laurie the detective, but, like, in very spits and spurts, and she doesn't really do anything interesting except for, like, her seance moments. But then we're, like, solidly in Van's perspective. And so I think it's really this, like, almost like a Jekyll and Hyde aesthetic, you know. We've got our nice, you know, Dr. Jekyll, and then we've got our wicked Mr. Hyde, you know, this duality happening.
Well, and, you know, that's the duality, of course, of Dracula and Van Helsing, right? The lusting monster, you know, the gentleman, you know, pursuer of the monster.
Except this time it's been reversed.
Yeah.
You know, our kind and gentle monster who only feeds just what he needs.
No, and I think that all works really well. It is a little bit slow and unfocused, as I talked about with Allison. It is a little bit scattershot. You know, it doesn't have the tightness of some thrillers, because, and it does describe itself as an erotic vampire thriller.
Oh, I see it.
And it does get more thrilling once you get toward where it's really cooking. But for it to have the descriptor of thriller, I'm not sure that we have that nice, drawn, taut tension throughout the whole movie.
No, I would completely agree, and I think that that's why I'm a little, like, on the fence, like, you know, with my opinions about this movie, because, again, like, I think that where it really succeeds is in all of its, like, visual prowess and all of these interesting moods and
ideas.
Yeah, and then I think that it wastes so much time on that, like, all these quiet, silent, introspective moments that, like, then out of nowhere it's like, oh god, we need to throw some plot in here. Okay, I don't know, have her have a vision, and then we'll skip ahead to him doing some more, like, interesting, introspective things. Because, like, I didn't, I guess, for me, understand the whole, like, their quote-unquote connection, you know, with her desperately wanting to use the spirit realm to understand what happened to these girls and have that be the means of her solving this mystery, and him getting all of those visions and seeing everything that she wished she saw. And I was like, this is weird.
Yeah.
This is really this is really a disjointed thing where I was like, or hear me out, you could do some detective work, and
Maybe
like,
we could have another victim.
yeah, or like, you know, she could have, yeah, we could have had another victim before his girlfriend, you know, and then maybe she finally figures out what's going on and like puts herself more directly in harm's way, and that's how he comes and saves the day, instead of it being him getting put in a trap and her coming there because of intuition.
Well, without getting... I don't... Some of it's a little bit spoilery, I think.
I mean, I don't know.
But I think that there is a reason for that connection.
Well, I know that that's the reason, but I think that they could have also, I think, picked either one or the other lane instead of just like driving on the lines.
No, that's fair. So if you had to give Pale Blood a rating out of 5, what would you give it?
I think I'm gonna go with a 3. I think that it's like, it's right in the middle of the lines.
No, yeah. Well, and this will tie into a little bit of our tail end discussion as well. You know, it also is coming at this time where, like I mentioned in my other discussion, neo-noir is kind of really having its day, and erotic thrillers are really coming into their own, and so you've got, like, Basic Instinct. A few years after this, you've got Wild Things. A few years before this, you had Blood Simple. You've got, like, Sam Raimi's A Simple Plan. You've got a lot of these stories that are happening and cropping up at this time. And even though it's a super, super interesting movie, and I like it for lots of reasons, if you just go in on a bare bones structure of a thriller level, compare it to some of these other things that are from that time, if it didn't have the direct vampire element, you know, I'm not sure that some of the thriller aspect of it would really hold up against some of those.
No, yeah, I think that if I put this script down on paper and just read it, I would be really lost. Because where they do have lines, I'm not sure, I guess, necessarily if they're, like, ever really motivated by anything. If that makes sense. You know?
Yeah.
It's just, it is talking about vampires. And that's the whole thing. Is like, who is the vampire hunter? We are vampires. And there's a whole lot of sexiness involved with vampires, and like that's pretty much where we live. I will agree with you though. I think that the soundtrack is kicking, and I think that Van is by far like our runaway surprise best actor of the bunch. Like he is eating everything that he is given, and it is gold to watch. It is so good. I wanted more of him, but less of him, because he was so good I hated him.
No, I think that that's totally fair. So I asked Allison this question, and I'll present it to you.
Okay.
I saw, as I told her, this thing on Twitter where people were discussing that a horror movie doesn't have to be scary. And, you know, she gave her answer. I put it at the beginning of the episode. Mm-hmm. For you, does a horror movie have to be scary? And if not, then what does a horror movie, I guess, for you personally need?
I do not think that a horror movie necessarily has to be, like, jump out of my seat scary. But I do have to be horrified.
In some capacity?
Yes, I think that it has to push the boundaries of comfortable, like a comfortable spot. It has to be either like grotesque, or it has to be like monstrous in who my killer is, or who my bad entity is, or anything like that. I think that it has to sit in an unsettling spot. And I do not necessarily think that it has to have, like, jump scares by any means, shape, or form. But I do think that it also has to have my perspective character in some kind of peril. You know, it's my lead, it's my person that I'm rooting for the whole time. It's their journey is and them getting through this journey is the reason that I've come here, you know, is to whether or not see them survive whatever the trials are, you know. And I think that that's what separates a horror movie from a thriller is, you know, I think that thriller is a bigger umbrella. I think that but I do think that, like, depending on the person, a horror movie should scare someone.
And that's probably fair. Because also, you know, some of the discussion was that people who have seen loads of horror movies, it's hard for them to get scared anymore in a horror film.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a totally fair point. And, you know, I don't necessarily get scared per se in certain horror films, but I think you're right. There has to be some moments of tension in some way, or discomfort in some way. You have to, I think it does have to tap into some of those sensibilities and some of those feelings, you know. It's kind of like in an action movie, you don't necessarily want it to be so telegraphed that your bad guy is going to lose and your good guy is going to win.
But, like, at the end of the day, that's what I want.
Yeah, and you know, that'll probably happen, but it shouldn't be so obvious, you know, on certain levels. There needs to be some tension in, like, the big climactic final fight. Mm-hmm. For me to go, that was a damn good action sequence.
Because, like, I've got a great example.
Yeah.
The original Evil Dead and the remake.
Yeah.
I think that they are both horror movies. I think that the first one is not scary. Yeah, not scary at all. But I do think that it pushes this envelope of what makes you feel comfortable the entire time. I think that it finds ways to be twisted and weird and unsettling. And again, never once truly, like, frightening, because also, like, you know, age has come upon this movie. But it's such a fun ride to go on, whereas the new one is truly horrifying. You know, I think that it takes all of the seeds that the original plants and, like, says, what if we actually made these things terrifying instead of kind of funny? You know what I mean? And I think that that's kind of the thing, you know. Again, both totally horror movies.
And the possessed person in the remake of Evil Dead is also as funny as the possessed person in the basement was in the original Evil Dead, but again, it's in, like, this much more perverse, you know, much more twisted, darkly funny way.
Yeah, no.
Whereas in the original, it's Ted Raimi in about 8 pounds of latex pretending to be, like, a woman, and it's hilarious.
Oh, yeah, totally. And again, still twisted, still unsettling, still just like, what am I watching? And I think that, you know, horror has to sit in an uncomfortable spot for a good bit of it in order for it to feel, you know, like a horror movie. And I think that, you know, like Mirror Mirror, was it always scary? No, there was a lot of character work and a lot of building happening, but, like, when it got to the nitty gritty of it, like, there were truly moments where I was like, oh my gosh, oh, that's horrifying.
Or even, you know, something as simple as, you know, her, like, for lack of a better word, you know, consummating her relationship with this mirror by, like, drinking the blood that starts to come.
Oh yeah, it was
out
so
of
unsettling. I was like, please stop it. The whole time, her relationship with that mirror was just unsettling. And again, I think that it needs to sit in a place that makes you uncomfortable, and it does not that uncomfortableness does not necessarily have to then be a terrifying experience.
No, for sure. So that's just about all that we have for the main discussion on this one. The last thing that I kind of wanted to leave with was, how do you feel now that we've gone through the whole month on how our Women in Film Month has gone? How do you enjoy, or how have you enjoyed this kind of look at what women have brought to the history of film?
Oh, I really enjoyed it. I think that it's a whole rainbow of feelings, of stories, of, you know, subject matter, and it truly just, like, you know, cements the fact that, like, anybody can do anything, you know, when given the opportunity. You know, just because they're women doesn't mean that they've made something girly or worse or whatever, you know, your mind goes to as like a derogatory, you know, thought process when it comes to women in any industry. And I think that, like, you know, it should, the line should blur more. I think that for the most part, our women directing movies have been more introspective when it comes to, like, emotionality and character work, and I find that really interesting. And usually, you know, you write what you know, and so they've also been mostly, you know, women centric stories about, you know, women leads, not necessarily, you know, doing, again, quote unquote, women things, but, like, it is, you know, they have interesting things to say, and I've truly enjoyed, especially, you know, getting to go back as far as we did to you know, the movie with Lucille Ball, you know, and all of these kind of, like, you gotta do what you gotta do kind of attitude that this movie had. And I think that that's still something that resonated with me as a woman now, as it's still a part of being a woman today. It's still this struggle against, you know, not necessarily like the patriarchy, but like as a mindset of where your place is, what your value is, and you can, you know, you having to put in more effort in order to be seen. And I think that, you know, that's completely still, you know, the fact of modern times, you know, with us still fighting for not only equality for women, but also people of color and, you know, people who don't identify the way the norm has labeled, you know, what people should be. And I've really enjoyed this journey. I would love to go further into, you know, not only looking at more of our common women directors that everybody knows, but also going further and deeper down into these more unknown stories, because I'm sure that there are some gems down there. And like we said in a previous conversation, you know, just because you're like a one-hit wonder, or like you don't get to do a lot of stuff, that first film is always, you know, the closest one to your heart. You know, it's the one that you've slaved over the most, as this is it. If this doesn't work, it's back to the drawing board, basically. You know, this is me on the page. And I would love to see what that means for not only other women, but also, you know, other identities as well. You know, to not just have one type of story from one perspective for one type of person told constantly on a loop, where, you know, the female characters have nothing going for them but being attractive and stupid. And that's not reality. And I'm not sure what reality you lived in that you thought that was the case either, because I have never once, like, met any woman that I would ever call stupid in any way, shape, or form, you know? So either that's your perfect woman, and then you need to get your head out of your ass. But yeah, no, I've truly, it's been a wonderful experience, and honestly, like, I want to do more of it.
No, for sure. I agree with you completely. You know, and I would love to honestly bring this back around potentially next March, if that's something that we're able to do scheduling wise and stuff like that. Because and potentially even expand the palette further. You know, we did manage to successfully incorporate non-American women. We incorporated some Asian women, both, you know, in anime and in live action. Mm-hmm. Our only like American woman, our only American women, I think, were like Mirror Mirror, and I'm not even sure if she's American. And Where My Children and Dance Girl Dance.
Dance Girl Dance. Thank you. Terrible name.
And so, you know, we managed to make a pretty wide spread, you know, also going from 1916 all the way to 2021. So we managed to, I think, cover really incredible ground, and I'm very proud of that. And I think that we made a pretty special month of content that I'm very proud of. And yeah, it covered a wide range of what women can be, you know, in front of and behind the camera. You know, women can be kind. Women can be messy. You know, women can be hard. Women can be into gore. You know, and these all sound, you know, like I'm sure to a lot of y'all like very duh things. But, you know, there are people who this is still revelatory for. The vast multitudes that a woman can contain as a person, as an identity.
Because also at the end of the day, you know, it's kind of that old adage, is like, you are what you eat. You know, you will never know the depths of any person or, you know,
group of people.
Exactly, until you truly get to see a wide range of differences, of personalities, of likenesses, of strengths, of weaknesses. Otherwise, you are going to just look at an entire group and go with the stereotype. You're going to go with what you've been spoon-fed your entire life by the media you've consumed. And if there's only one type out there, then that's the only type that you're going to get, and that's what you're going to make a lot of decisions around, and you don't realize it, but it is like a subconscious thing that happens when, you know, you only see black people portrayed as gangsters or as, you know, robbers or this, that, and the other, and you don't ever get any positive outlets for that, and that's what you're going to assume that all black people are like.
And when you get people that then come out and do speak on their experience of a certain group, if you're not exposed to how vast the opinions of that group are, then that person then starts to speak as a monolith for you. And so then you're taking that idea of what that person believes, even if it's positive, and then applying that too broadly, you know, to your understanding of that group.
No, exactly. You know, we are all a multitude of different things that make up us as an individual. We may identify with things that bring us together, but at the end of the day, we're kind of like a giant Venn diagram with multiple amounts of circles that constantly, you know, intermingle, and some are bigger and smaller, but at the end of the day, it's like a fingerprint. We all have different things, but, you know, we all have things that bring us together in different groups. And so looking at an entire group like women and just saying that all women are this is a very, you know, small-minded opinion about, you know, a group of people that also enjoy doing roller derby or love to act or love, you know, to be a doctor or whatever, you know, all of these things that make us different. And I think that this has been a really great experience, but it's just been, it's a scratch of the surface. There's
Yeah.
so many more things to go down.
We honestly could have done a movie a day.
Exactly.
And that still would have been scratching the surface.
And I think that this has been a great experience for Women's History Month as a start, is breaking a little bit of a boundary away and then continuing down it, because like I would love to, again, like I said, to watch more, to experience more, because not only is the woman perspective important, but also there are women from all over the world. There are women who tall women, short women, all of these different things that make us human, that are the things that we can bring to our art and to the things that we make, that make that thing also uniquely special.
No, absolutely. And, as a great example, just using a film that we talked about this month, Clint Eastwood could have never made The Power of the Dog.
No.
And that's because of who Clint is, because of his experience. And he could have shot it, and he could have done it, but it wouldn't have had the same emotional textures that Jane Campion brought to that movie.
Yeah. And I'm sure that he definitely would have never touched on part of its subject matter either.
Or if he did, it would have come across potentially either half-baked or a little bit over, maybe even potentially ham-fisted.
Yeah.
But she brought a lot of depth to that. And so, I think that it's probably a pretty limited number of men who make Westerns today that I think could have made The Power of the Dog.
Well, I mean, considering the fact that, even, people, prominent men who have done Westerns looked at this movie and were like, garbage and trash, just shows how, narrow-minded their perspective of not only of an entire genre can truly be.
Yeah.
It's not just one thing, because if it's just one thing, then why should we have 100 of it? Why should we have thousands of it? Why do I want to watch the same show on repeat, but not just the same show, the same episode of the same show on repeat? That's boring.
No, that's totally fair. I think that's pretty much where we'll wrap it up for them today.
Yeah, I mean, they've heard us talk for a very long time. But, if you liked this month and you want more things, like it. I don't know if you like podcasts. Write a review. That's how you like this podcast.
Or
Rate
share it with someone.
Yeah, share it with somebody. Share it with somebody you love. Share it with somebody you hate. I really don't care.
Maybe if you didn't enjoy it, specifically send it to someone that you hate.
Or I don't know. You do you, but also help us sister out.
Thank you guys for listening. It's, like I said, it's been a great month. I have to also go and thank all of our guests that we've had on this month. Thank you to Austin and Tori from the Third Impact Anime Podcast. Thank you to Madeline. Thank you for Dr. Allison Pierce. We really appreciate y'all bringing your expertise, your knowledge, because even though I try to do as much research as I possibly can and come as equipped as I possibly can, you do just sometimes need that person to come in and teach you and be an expert voice and provide all that they know, because just as no people are the same, no one's knowledge is the same. Austin and Tori have such a vast particular knowledge that I don't have, and Madeline is one of the most well-read, well-rounded people that I probably know, with this very incredible depth of knowledge that she's acquired of very particular subsets of history, and Allison, master of horror right there. And so we definitely thank y'all for coming in and bringing your perspectives and your voice to this month of content as well.
Yes.
Lastly, the last thing that I'll say before I let y'all go. I'm like a bad preacher. I'm like, one more thing. I just dropped a review Thursday of the brand new HBO show. It's a Max original, One Perfect Shot, where they go and do a half-hour little docu-series talking to 6 different filmmakers where they selected their perfect shot from the films that they have directed. And they talk a little bit about their own personal history. They bring in some people who worked on the film along the way. And then they also do this kind of immersive breakdown of the shot. It's really interesting. I wrote a review for it, and so if you would like to go and give that a read, I've got that posted in the show notes. Thank you guys so much for listening. Don't forget to come back next month. We'll be announcing what that's going to look like sometime here soon. There's going to be a potential collaboration with another show.
Woo!
So it's going to be another good month. Thanks for listening, you guys. We'll talk to y'all next week.
Bye.